starts of a class with a conversation. Okay. So here are some cliches that I've heard, maybe you've heard over the years. Movement is life. It's one of my favorites. One of my former students, who's now a professor at Palmer Chiropractic, uses that all the time. Movement is life. Motion is lotion is another good one I heard from a former student of mine who's in physical therapy. You move or you die. Obviously, these are extreme examples. In the military, in the teams, you've got to keep moving. You can't stay static. Um, Static means not moving. Dynamic means to move. Right? So our lifestyles, not personally but generally, requires extreme periods of time of staticness. I'll give you some examples. Driving in a car, you're in traffic, you're in a static position over extended periods of time. You're watching Saturday, I'm guilty of it. I say I'll just watch football all day and be in a static position. You're working at your computer, you're studying, heck, sleeping for hours and hours. You may be in the same position over extended periods of time. And you ever notice when you get out of bed, maybe not all of you, you're young and still functioning, but for me, at my age, I get out of bed and I'm like, you just gotta move around a little bit. And after a little bit, you kind of feel like a tin man from Wizard of Oz getting the oil in the joints, you know. You move around. So the conversation today is about our muscles have some very unique properties to it. And I'm gonna keep it simple, because sometimes when you go into the physiological weeds a lot, you lose sight of practicalness of the common sense knowledge that we already know. And our muscles have some of these little feedback loops in it. You might have heard of like the Golgi tendon organ, muscle spindles, and proprioceptive feedback. And some of these organs are meant to be protective mechanisms, like the Golgi tendon organ is a reflex inhibitor. It's like a brake for your muscle to make sure it doesn't pull too much, because you don't want to hurt it. Or in a stretch where you're holding a static stretch for a while, it may say, "Oh, I don't like this," but if you don't do damage to it over a period of time, that's why you stretch for several seconds. The Golgi tendon organ's like, "All right, you didn't do any damage to me, so I'll let you go a little bit further." But things like that we have inherently in our bodies. But today, what I want to really emphasize is the common sense practicalness of not moving and what it does to muscles in general. One of the things we don't do now because of research and understanding is we used to splint a lot back in the day. Putting your arm in a splint, right? We don't do that. Casting and splinting are like last resorts. Immobilization, last resort. If we immobilize something, there's no other option. We want movement. And a few reasons we want movement is, you can imagine put your arm in a flexed fetal kind of position here over weeks. Imagine a kid growing up in the 80s, falling on their arm. Maybe it's a bruise. The doctor, who's, bless their hearts, weren't specialists back then. They were just general doctors. They didn't know, well, if it hurts, let's just splint it up so you don't risk moving. Like the protection price, protection, rest, ice compression, all that. So protection. Well, when that kid gets out of that splint, what do you think that arm's going to feel like? It's going to be very stiff. It's going to atrophy. It's going to shrink. And it'll look like a fiddler crab with one normal arm that's been moving and one immobilized arm that's stiff and atrophied. So one of the things the muscles do, which is really kind of neat, they want to maintain optimal, contractile, the little filaments, the little actin and myosin. They want to maintain optimal interaction in the length that the muscle is in a majority of your time. That's what we call resting length. So in other words, if you're spend the majority of your life roughly around anatomical position, that's where the muscles want to be at, so that way at any given instance, they can generate maximum force in case you need to move or else whatever you do. If you shorten a muscle, this is a review from exercise phys, if you shorten a muscle, those actin and myosin overlap, right? And they don't have optimal pull when they overlap. If you slack a muscle, overlap those actin and myosin over extended periods of time, your muscle's like, I'm not really in a position that I'm comfortable in generating force. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start eating up sarcomeres, what we call in series in lymph, literally cannibalizing itself so that I can create a new resting length so that I can have optimal actin and myosin overlap. And the tightness you feel is literally that muscle being stretched as if you were stretching like your hamstrings, right? So motion is lotion. Some people have different ranges of motion than others. Some people are naturally have stiff muscles. But for you guys dealing with people, working with people, you're gonna, this was who gave me this piece of advice way back when I was your age? Stephen Kramer. He's a physical therapist at PT South, excellent therapist. Stephen used to say, if somebody would come into my clinic and let's say I was working on their ankle, but I noticed they had poor posture, I would work with them on their posture. Because it may not be a problem now, but eventually it's going to be a problem for that person, whether it's 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. And so the whole point of our stretching lecture today and Friday is not to necessarily tell you how to stretch. In fact, ACSM is pretty, from my last reading or understanding, and when I say reading, I don't read, I watch YouTube videos or hear it at a presentation. Motion is motion. Whether you statically stretch, whether you dynamically stretch, anything is better than nothing. Any movement is better than no movement. So they're not saying, hey, you got to do it this way or it's not worth doing. Movement is life, any kind of motion, all right? So what we're working towards in biomechanics is saying, so I should have done that before, but Chris and I had some business to talk about. There's as many groups of muscles as there are joint motions. We name these muscles based off of. Let's take an easy joint that we have access to see, like the wrist. We have 4 groups at the wrist. Remember, this is not wrist motion, right? We have flexion pullers, extension pullers, polar deviation pullers, and radial deviation. If I have a weight here, I need my wrist extensors, prevent flexion. Here, I need my radial deviators, preventing ulna. Here, I need my flexors, prevent extension. One of our first early units in lecture. I'm going to list one of the specific muscles in the wrist, okay? Spell check me. That's how they sound. What does that muscle do? Now, a lot of people already know our all-star muscles, the biceps, the tris, the glutes, the hams, the quads. Okay. What I'm going to teach you and that we're working towards is any muscle has a function, and what that function is based off of is direction of pull. How does it pull? Not what motion it causes, because we've established one muscle could be responsible for different motions through different contractions. Flexor carpi radialis is a wrist flexor, meaning it pulls that way. And it's on the radial side, so it's a radial muscles can only yes, yes. Y'all like ask me that on the test, Campbell. I'll be able to get it right then. Muscles can only pull. And one of the limitations of tension is that things that pull cannot lengthen themselves. We've talked about that before. A rubber band can't just magically do that. If it does, I'd like to know where you got that rubber band at. Maybe in Hogwarts or one of those magical places. Things that cannot lengthen themselves. They can shorten themselves, but they cannot lengthen. Does it make sense that if I want to lengthen this TheraBand and it's pulling in, I have to pull it out? Common sense. If I have a muscle that's a wrist flexion puller, if I want to lengthen that rubber band, I have to extend. The same concept. Flexion pullers get stretched when you extend the wrist. Extension pullers get stretched when you flex the wrist. Because that's how things that pull work. Okay? So the easy part about this stuff is if you know the direction of pull of any muscle, and in biomechanics, we're going to talk about a lot of muscles. There's a lot more influences of motion than the bicep, the tricep, the glutes, the hams, the quads, the glutes. Flexor carpi radialis. How do I stretch it? Well, what does it do? How does it pull? The semimembranosus. How do I stretch it? Well, what does it do? How does it pull? The rectus femoris. How do I stretch it? Well, what does it do? How does it pull? So if you Google rectus femoris, Google or whatever search function you are, it'll tell you stuff like this is where my dyslexia occurs. I can't sound out things; they all sound the same for me. Femoris, femoris, femoras. You can say that. All sounds the same. How would I stretch a rectus femoris muscle? Well, what does it do? How does it pull? I'm going to teach you that specifically this muscle is a hip flexion puller. So that means to stretch, to lengthen that rubber band, we have to extend the hip. In addition, this muscle is a knee extension puller. So if I really want to isolate or get that TheraBand, get that rubber band stretched, I could just stretch it at the hip. But if I really want to get it, I'm going to also stretch it at the knee. Some muscles only get stretched one way. Call those the uniarticular muscles. But other muscles cross multiple joints. And they can be stretched at one joint and the other joint. Or they can be slacked at one joint or the other joint. This is why, for that muscle, you feel a little bit more oomph when you do something like this. Because you're stretching that rubber band at the hip and the knee for that specific muscle. So for the test, all I'm going to do is ask you, this is why we spend Unit 1 on position. Where are you at? Where are you at? Where are you at? Where are you at? Because where are you at is the whole basis of static stretching. If your hip is extended, you're stretching flexors. If your knee is flexed, you're stretching extensors. If your wrist is extended, you're stretching flexors. If your elbow is flexed, you're stretching extensors. If your shoulder is externally rotated, you're stretching internal rotated. If your shoulder is horizontally abducted, you're stretching horizontal adduction. is that easy when we have a process. If I'm looking to the right, I'm stretching muscles that are pulling me to the left. Who are those muscles? We'll learn. We'll learn, but not now. We have to see the concepts first. I think one of the easy ones to see is everybody, if you're willing and able, go right ear, right shoulder, and you tell me, do you feel a pull on the left side or your right side of your neck? We need to be able to verbally communicate it. Right lateral cervical bending is going to stretch my left lateral cervical benders. We're just giving it a language. Cervical flexion is going to stretch cervical extensors. Cervical extension is going to stretch cervical flexors. Eventually, in biomechanics and when you guys go to grad school, this process is going to be real useful because now you're going to get into specific muscles, right? Like the MRI comes back and says you have a strain to the quadratus femoris. Well, in order to work it, rehab it, stretch it, you got to know what it does. And what it does is a function of how it pulls. It pulls that way all the time. The motion you see will not be all the time. In fact, when we do manual muscle tests, is there motion involved with that? No. But if I know the rectus femoris is a hip flexion puller, then I know my external force has to be an extension external force. Don't let me push it down. If I know that it's a knee extension puller, I know my external force needs to try to flex. Don't let me push your leg down. Right? There's no motion with manual muscle tests. Any questions before we get into applied practice? Euler? So, and I'm going to let Lindsay give her feedback, but the process should be for any stretching question, identify that position, identify that joint position. We analyze motion joint by joint. We analyze muscles joint by joint. Therefore, we analyze stretching joint by joint. Identify the joint position and know that anything that pulls in the same way as that position is going to be shorter. And anything that pulls in the opposite direction of that position is going to get longer because it's a function of tension, how things move. All right, let's do this. Why not? Good thing. Okay, let's look at the trunk, frontal plane trunk. If we can, yoink, yoink. Off. Let's have a trunk conversation. We're going to start off simple. Identify the position. And I always, again, it's not, I just want right answers. My process is always eliminate who it can't be so that I can see who it must be. It's always my way of doing things. How is her trunk bent? Is it bent to her right or to her left? What's that, you little shy guys? I know why everybody's so quiet. Y'all are excited about seeing, what's that new movie my sons want to go see? Not Lego movie? Yes, yeah, that's what's on your mind. Y'all ready to go see some chicken jockeys and stuff, right? Did I get that right? Did I say that right? I know what's up. How is her trunk bent? To her right, good. Does it make sense that if she's bending to her right, you can literally see her clothes, like her clothes are crinkled. They're side that she's actually bending to. The clues in the clothing. The side that's being stretched is her left side, her left laterals. In biomechanics, I'm going to teach you who the left laterals are, but it all starts with pull. I'm going to teach you that the left external, left internal, left rectus, left erector, spinalis, iliocastalis, longissimus. But if you talk about all of those things, you would be there all day. Who am I stretching? The left lateral trunk benders. Who are those muscles? Easy. Bang, 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 bang. Or imagine this. MRI comes back and says you have a contracture, a tightness of the left internal oblique. It's not like in Sports Center where they're going to say, player is out for 5 weeks with a strained oblique. Which one? They don't all pull the same. So when you have a specific muscle, you can say, cool, how does it specifically pull? And then you can do some things with that. Left internal oblique is a trunk flexor, it's a left lateral trunk bender, and it's a left transverse trunk rotator because that's how it pulls. So if I'm trying to stretch this muscle in the frontal plane, I want to make sure I bend to my right because it pulls to the left. We're going to get to those more in-depth applications in biomechanics, but we got to start from somewhere. And that's identifying group of pull based off of position. She's bent to the right, she's going to be stretching muscles that pull to the left. We have a name for that group, left lateral trunk benders. Cool? If I were you, and I don't want to speak for Lindsay, but I would hope that like there were 33 stretch questions. Because it's that simple. Just identify the position, eliminate who it can't be, and see who it must be. If we did shoulder frontal plane, because remember, I can get to the same place going sagittal or going frontal. That's why the term lateral flexion was used for a long time until we kind of just substituted with abduction because we made flexion reserved for sagittal travel. Frontal plane, she's abducted, so she'd be stretching adductors. Cervical, her cervical vertebra is bent to the right. How do I know? Her right ear is closer to her right shoulder. She's got to be stretching muscles that pull to the left laterally. Who are those muscles? Who cares? We're going to learn them. But we got to get the verbiage down. What does a left lateral cervical bender mean? It means that it pulls to the left laterally. That much. We'll get into left sternocleidomastoids and left erector spinalis, but none of those names of muscles, rectus femoris doesn't scream hip flexor, knee extensor. So we have to train ourselves as future practitioners. When you hear a muscle, your first question, what does it do? Because of how does it pull? Then we can do some things with it. I just want to get to some other examples. Lindsay, while I pull up some examples, do you mind sharing some insight on how you do the stretching questions or how do you look at it?
Well, I feel like that's probably, like you said, the easiest. But I like, he can ask the question where, what group is being stretched, or he can ask, how do you stretch muscles? And that's, when I thought about it. So I think it's what is being stretched. I would ask, identify the position and then identify which is what is being stretched. But if he's asking, how do you stretch this group, or how do you stretch this muscle, then you identify what is pulling, how does the group pull, and then you move in the opposite direction to stretch.
Yeah. And for this test, I'm never going to ask you a rectus femoris. I'm never going to ask you a specific player in a team. I'm not going to ask you what does Michael Jordan do, even though we all know Michael Jordan, our GOAT, greatest of all time. Just messing with you, although he is. I'm not going to ask you about specific players. I'm not going to ask you about Jalen Hurts. I'm not going to ask you about Drew Brees. I'm not going to ask you about Joe Burrow. But I will ask you about the Bengals. I'm going to ask you about the Saints. I'm going to ask you about the 76ers. I'm going to ask you about the UL Raging Cajuns. Teams try to win. Teams try to accomplish what they're trying to accomplish, which is win a game. Muscles try to accomplish what they're trying to do, and that's create motion in the direction they're pulled. However, they don't always do it. They don't always want to do it, but they always pull that way. The classic example, the bicep does make my elbow flex, but only through concentric context. The same muscles pulling in the same direction can keep me in a flexed position, working through isometric context. And the same muscles pulling in the same direction can let me extend through eccentric context. 3 different movements, 1 static, 2 dynamic, 2 in the opposite directions of motion, but the same purpose, pulling in the direction of flexion, allowed all 3 scenarios. That's why we do what we do. That's why we say what we say. Let's practice. I want trunk rotators. Based off of this position, can you identify, is she stretching right transverse or left transverse? Don't answer it out loud, give it some time. Use your clues. I think one of our clues that we used was sternum to pelvis, right? And if those things are lined up, if her sternum is lined up with her pubis, she's not twisted at all. Utilize that sternum to see which direction she would be deviated in. As always, feel free to talk with your neighbor if you feel comfortable. But hey, what do you get? Or Lindsay could be your neighbor. So it'll be Mr. Robbins. But that's where you learn. Because if one of you says right and the other says left, now you got a conversation going. I would do this one for you guys, but I kind of want to keep my hamstrings attached to my pelvis. All right, how is her trunk rotated? What's the position of her trunk? How is she twisted? To her right. She's right transverse rotated, so she wouldn't be stretching muscles that are pulling to the right transverse. She has to be stretching muscles that are pulling to the left transverse. We have a name for that team, left transverse trunk rotators. Not because of the motion necessarily, but because of the pull. Because of motion, because of pull. Pretty good, huh? Kermit the Frog here. All right, guys, let's start. Let's just do start at the bottom and work our way up. One day I might do my Louis Armstrong impression for you guys. That's probably my best one. Y'all probably don't know who Louis Armstrong is. What's it? The colors of the rainbows, pretty in the sky. People going by, I see friends shaking hands, saying, how do you do? Pretty good. Neat work. I used to do a pretty mean Christopher Walken. Oh, the weather outside is frightful, but the fire is so delightful. All right, guys, ankle. How do we know what we're stretching? Now, the default answer would be the calf. We're stretching the calf. What's a calf besides like a baby cow? The calf, what are we stretching? I'm trying to teach you new verbiage. I'm trying to recondition your brain to not play fast and loose from the bro science of the magazines and our non-kinesiology trained people that also do this stuff, right? So I'm trying to train you to say, okay, what's the position of his ankles? He's dorsiflexed. What is he stretching? The plantar flexors. Who are the plantar flexors? And in biomechanics, we're going to talk about the soleus, the gastroc, the tibialis posterior, flexor hallucis longus, flexor digitorum longus, longus rex. I see why people just say they have. But in practice, if somebody has a tibialis posterior problem and all you do is carry around a hammer, you better hope the muscle that needs fixing is innate. We have to have a toolkit. We have to develop our tools. Now, in biomechanics, we're going to talk about link tension issues and how, just like the rectus femoris, I said, crosses the hip and the knee. We're going to talk about how the gastroc crosses the knee and the ankle. And when you flex the knee, you slack the gastroc at the knee, which makes it looser at the ankle, so you can go a little bit further and stretch other ankle plantar flexors. It's all that stuff. But we got to be able to speak the language of pull first, right? I'm stretching plantar flexors because I'm dorsiflexed. Who are the plantar flexors? I'm going to teach them to you. But you got muscles that pull in the direction of plantar flexion, and they're going to be lengthened when you dorsiflex. Let's do wrists. And it's not that there's not other things. I'm just trying to isolate, make sure we cover as many as we can. Let's do wrists. Give that some thought. And I will say this, if you guys have a good understanding of the stretch stuff, it's really not much to it. You identify your position, and then you eliminate who it can't be, and you identify who you can be. Then I'll be more than happy to do more muscles, motion, contraction practice on Friday. All right, wrists. Are the wrists flexed or extended? Extended. So I got to be stretching flexors. Is that simple? In biomechanics, we're going to learn who the flexors are. Palmaris longus, flexor digitorum superficialis, flexor digitorum profundus, flexor carpi radialis, flexor carpi ulnaris. But that's just geography. That's all it is. Can you do something with it? Anybody can memorize the 50 presidents. Anybody can memorize states and capitals. Anybody can memorize ingredients. Can you cook? Can you do something with the ingredients? And you can. You just have to be taught how to, just like I had to be taught how to. Let's do more. Again, don't answer it right away. I'm just setting up the question. Ooh, this worked really well for biomechanics. I'm going to give you 4 answer choices. Write them down, record them, however you want to do. Let's say shoulder horizontal abductors, shoulder horizontal adductors, shoulder internal rotators, shoulder external rotators. Those are your answer choices. And knowing me, I'd probably put right shoulder, left shoulder. But that's all these. Like, if you know it, you know it. Don't let the answer choices fool you. Is that his right or his left shoulder? see if you know that horizontal AB and AD isn't about where the forearm's going, it's where the shoulder's going. It's a ball. All right, guys, what was the answer? Awkward silence is not an answer, you guys. All right, which one? Let me ask you this, and I'm getting feedback from you guys. Which two do you know it can't be? It can't be the horizontal stuff, right? You can eliminate those. So we're down to internal and external rotators. What's the position? See, too many times I think students go right to the answer choices, and those choices sound so similar that it messes with you, especially abs and ads and rights and those. So stick to the process and then see which answer choice confirms your process. The picture on the right, the person's externally rotated relative to anatomical position. So I can't be stretching external rotators. I have to be stretching internal rotators. So specifically, left shoulder internal rotators would be being stretched because I've identified the position of the shoulder outside of anatomy. Make sense? And again, who are those muscles? Who cares? We'll get to that. But we have to practice this step. I introduced it to you. We have to develop it and master it so that we could say, I know you're stretching, bless you. I know you're stretching left shoulder, internal rotators. Who are those muscles? That's when we're going to get into the next phase, the next step. Oh, there's just a here. All right, let's play this is like what's that movie Saw? I want to play a game. Let's play a game. Let's look at right hip. Also, I want sagittal and I want transverse. Remember, transverse is from the long bones perspective. Sagittal is from the sockets perspective. So establish the position of the hip sagittally. Am I flexed or extended? And then establish the position of the hip transversely. Am I internally or externally located? Ready, go.
If she's flexed, she's got to be stretched and extended. And if she's extended, she's got to be stretched and flexed. It's just how things at full work. Transversely, is she internally or externally rotated on that right hip? Externally rotated. Good. You be stretching internal rotation. That's why we spend so much time on motion and position, because to get that right, you got to remember that you had that illusion. You got to understand this isn't in just because the foot's in. It's external because literally the hip is externally rotated. So that you can bring it. All right. Curveball. Let's do left hip frontally. I know she's probably has it a little bit more out than to the side. Let's just pretend she just has it out like this. She's flexible, easy direction. Hip frontally, she would be abducted. So she wouldn't be stretching abduction forwards, like the gluteus medius and minimus, tensor fascia lata, piriform. We get into those muscles. She'd be stretching adduction pulls, or adduct a group of muscles that pull your leg in. And we'll get into who those are. I'm going to teach you all about the gracilis and the adductor longus and brevis and magnus and pectineus. But does it make sense if all we do is establish one member of the team and that's all we ever talk about? Bicep, tricep, then we lose focus to all the other members of the team, because all those other members of the team could get injured, could have a problem, might need coaching, might need help, might need stretching, might need rehab. There's a lot of team members in our body. Okay? Guys, don't forget your rights from your lefts. And if I've said it once, I'll say it 5 more times. It's from the person you're analyzing's perspective. It's their right, it's their left. Right hip, her hands are on her left knee. So her right hip is in what position relative to anatomical? It's extended. So that means she's got to be stretching flexion pullers. Good. Think of it like this. Think of stretching like this. Muscles pull all the time. Even at rest, they have a resting tension, resting pull. But the stretchy components, that's just the contractile components. The stretchy stuff is like literally a rubber band or a TheraBand. At resting length, the rubber band is just sitting there. Once you lengthen it beyond rest, that's when you really start feeling the stretchy components want to pull back. That's why you got to take your joint past anatomical to start feeling those rubber band-like components pull. What about our right ankle? Who are we stretching at the right ankle? You see, if that was just an open-ended conversation, that'd be kind of tough. There's a lot of players, a lot of muscles. But if we have a process, my right ankle is plantar flexed. I must be stretching dorsiflexors. The dorsiflexors are tibialis anterior, extensor hallucis, longus tensor digitorum, longus peroneus tertius. It's going to be a process. But before we get to the specifics, we're taking a it's not even a shortcut. We're checking ourselves. We're establishing who it must be. And then the last step is the easiest step. Who's on that team? Who's in that group? Who's in that band? But if we were going to reverse engineer it in a clinic, and we say, wow, this person really has a tight tibialis anterior. Nothing about that muscle says how it pulls. It's a muscle that lives most of its life on the front of the tibia. But in biomechanics, we're going to say the tibialis anterior is a dorsiflexor and an inverter. That's how it pulls. Well, since it's a dorsiflexor, if I want to stretch it, I want a plantar flex. And because it's an inverter, if I want to stretch it at the subtalar, I need an evert. Because it's a dorsiflexor, if I want to recruit it, like work it out or exercise it, I need an external force that's trying to plantar flex so that I can work it as a dorsiflexor. Or if I want to work it as an inverter, I want to put that TheraBand to try to evert me so that I can work inverter. It's reverse engineering. The group, how does it pull? Who are those muscles? The specific muscle, how does it pull? It's just being able to go back and forth. But it's all based off of pull. It's all based off of how they. All right, how about we get one more before I dismiss you? Let's do. All right, this one I want to talk about because a lot of students will, whatever reason, whatever reason, I understand it's stressful, you're trying to do these things quick. But remember, on all of the questions that I give you before and after, I say start, finish. Start, finish, start, finish, start, finish, start, finish. So we can do a start, finish. So in other words, what muscles at her cervical would be stretched when I start here and I go to this new position? And a lot of students, I think it's, in talking to several students going over tests, it's like, well, I read the question and then I automatically go to the picture that's closest to the end of the question. And I'm like, that's fascinating. I'm sorry you do that, because I literally say start, finish on it, but just be mindful of those things, okay? That I'm trying to communicate, hey, where did you start, where did you finish? So in this regard, she's stretching and then she changes her position to stretch something else. So I'm asking about this one. How is her neck twisted? To her right or to her left? Good. She can't be stretching muscles that pull that way. She's got to be stretching muscles that pull the other way. That's simple. She's stretching left transverse cervical rotators. And I'm going to teach you who those are in biomechanics. Guys, does it make any kind of sense that it would be really difficult without a process to be like, I'm stretching right sternocleidomastoid and left erector spinae? But if I say, okay, how is she positioned? She's positioned to her right. She's not stretching muscles that pull to the right. She's stretching muscles that pull to the left. Who are those muscles? Right sternocleidomastoid, left erector spinae. It's a lot easier to get to where you want to go when there's a roadmap to get there. All right, you guys, I'll work on those impressions, I promise. Have a good one.